Few television shows in history have built a fan base as passionate or as enduring as Star Trek. And at the center of it all stood William Shatner, the larger-than-life actor who brought Captain James T. Kirk to life. For decades, fans only saw the polished surface, the iconic episodes, the groundbreaking storytelling, the crew that became legends. But behind the scenes, tensions were simmering, rivalries were forming, and secrets were being buried. Now, at EUR 93, Shatner has decided it's time to finally pull back the curtain. He's revealing what really happened on the set of Star Trek, the feuds with his castmates, the jealousy over screen time, the moments of betrayal, and the truth about how close the series came to falling apart. His confessions don't just rewrite the history of one of television's most beloved franchises, they expose the human drama behind the fantasy that millions of fans never knew. When Star Trek premiered in 1966, no one could have predicted it would become one of the most influential franchises in television history. At the helm was William Shatner, playing Captain James T. Kirk, a bold, charismatic leader who embodied bravery, charm, and authority. To audiences, Kirk was the perfect captain, and Shatner seemed to step effortlessly into the role. But behind the camera, things weren't nearly as smooth as they appeared. From the very beginning, Shatner's presence on set created mixed feelings among his castmates. While producers praised him as the show's anchor, others felt overshadowed by his performance. Leonard Nimoy, who portrayed Spock, quickly became a fan favorite, sparking whispers of rivalry between the two actors. Shatner has since admitted that he noticed the shift in attention, and it fueled an underlying tension that would linger throughout the series. According to Shatner, part of the friction stemmed from the way the show was written and edited. He recalls seeing scenes where supporting characters originally had stronger dialogue, only to find, during filming or in post-production, that the focus had shifted back to Captain Kirk. While some attributed this to Shatner's charisma, others believed it was intentional maneuvering to keep him at the center of attention. George Takei, who played Sulu, and James Doohan, who portrayed Scotty, were among those who later accused Shatner of hogging the spotlight. Shatner, however, has always defended himself. In recent interviews, he revealed that he never asked for other actors' lines to be cut, but acknowledged that the show was designed to revolve around Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. That's the way the producers wanted it, Shatner explained. But the rest of the cast felt cheated. They wanted more of the story, more of the screen, and I don't blame them. Still, these creative choices sparked lasting resentment. Shatner remembers walking on set and feeling the tension. Some of his co-stars, he admits, were cold toward him, keeping their distance except when the cameras were rolling. He tried to brush it off, but privately he felt isolated. I was the captain on screen, he later confessed, but I often felt like the outcast off-screen. Adding fuel to the fire was Shatner's reputation for perfectionism. He pushed for retakes, questioned dialogue, and wasn't afraid to challenge directors. While this made him appear demanding, Shatner insists it was about protecting the show's quality. Yet for his castmates, it often felt like he was overstepping his role. As Star Trek struggled in the ratings during its original run, this mix of ambition, rivalry, and resentment only grew stronger. Shatner admits now, at 93, that he underestimated how deeply his co-stars resented his presence. He saw himself as a hard-working professional, carrying the weight of the show. They saw him as someone who took more than his fair share of the spotlight. Looking back, Shatner acknowledges that the seeds of conflict were planted during those first 3 seasons, conflicts that would linger for decades, shaping the way fans, cast, and even Shatner himself remembered the legendary series. By the second season of Star Trek, the tension between William Shatner and his co-stars had grown more visible, and the cracks within the crew's camaraderie began to widen. At 93, Shatner now reflects candidly on what those years were really like, a mixture of professional jealousy, creative frustrations, and outright hostility that at times threatened to derail the show. The strongest resentment came from George Takei, and James Doohan. Takei, who played Sulu, has spoken openly about his frustration over being sidelined, saying that Shatner consistently positioned himself as the star at the expense of others. Doohan, beloved as Scotty, took it a step further, claiming he never liked Shatner at all. "I just don't want to be in the same room with him," Doohan once said, bluntly. Shatner, looking back, admits that these comments hurt. "I didn't understand the depth of their anger," he explained. "To me, it was just a job. To them, it was personal." The conflict wasn't only about screen time. On set, Shatner's intense focus on his own performance often made others feel ignored or dismissed. He has since confessed that he was so wrapped up in carrying the responsibility of the show that he failed to notice how alienated his co-stars felt. "I wasn't always aware of their needs," he admitted. "I was consumed with the work." Even Leonard Nimoy, who shared the most iconic on-screen partnership with Shatner, wasn't immune to the strain. While the two men developed a deep respect for each other, Shatner acknowledges that their relationship wasn't always smooth. He recalls moments when Nimoy was frustrated by Shatner's insistence on more close-ups or his attempts to shape the direction of certain scenes. Yet, unlike others, Nimoy often chose diplomacy over confrontation. In time, their relationship softened into friendship, but Shatner admits the rivalry left its mark. Nichelle Nichols, who played Uhura, offered another perspective. She later revealed that, while she respected Shatner, she too felt marginalized. The groundbreaking significance of her role as a black woman in a position of authority was undercut, she argued, by limited storylines. Shatner agrees with her now, noting that Hollywood at the time failed to recognize the importance of her presence. "She deserved more," he admitted, "and I wish I had fought harder for her." The resentment came to a head in private conversations, side remarks, and sometimes in subtle on-set behavior. Shatner recalls walking into the makeup trailer only to have conversations stop abruptly, as if the others didn't want him around. "I felt like the outsider," he said, "and yet I was the captain." The irony wasn't lost on me. These tensions didn't end when the original series wrapped in 1969. In fact, they carried into the decades of movies and conventions that followed. Every reunion was shadowed by unresolved bitterness, and fan questions often forced the cast to revisit those old wounds in public. Shatner admits that he was often blindsided by the hostility, only realizing much later how deeply some of his co-stars resented him. Now, as he looks back, Shatner doesn't shy away from the truth. Star Trek may have appeared to show a united crew exploring the stars, but off-camera, betrayal and resentment simmered just beneath the surface. While Star Trek dazzled audiences with visions of interstellar adventure, the reality behind the scenes was far less glamorous. At 93, William Shatner doesn't sugarcoat it. The production of the original series was a chaotic storm of budget battles, time pressures, and constant clashes with network executives. From the very beginning, NBC executives were nervous. The concept of Star Trek, a cerebral science fiction series dealing with morality, philosophy, and social commentary, was unlike anything on television in the mid-1960s. The show wasn't just about aliens and spaceships, it was about humanity. Yet executives often saw it as too intellectual, too risky, and too expensive. Shatner recalls how the cast would arrive on set to find scripts rewritten overnight, costumes rushed, and sets held together with tape and paint. "It looked incredible on television," Shatner explained, "but in person, the bridge of the Enterprise was practically falling apart. The tight shooting schedule only added to the chaos. Episodes were often filmed in just 6 or 7 days, leaving little room for mistakes. When special effects failed or when dialogue needed last-minute changes, the cast and crew had to improvise." Shatner remembers long nights where the actors worked past exhaustion, sometimes doing multiple takes into the early morning. "We were barely hanging on," he said. Budget restrictions were a constant obstacle. By the 3rd season, the show's financial struggles were so severe that many episodes relied heavily on recycled props, reused footage, and limited locations. Shatner admits he often worried the entire production would collapse.
Every week it felt like we were one bad rating away from being canceled, he reflected. But perhaps the greatest struggle was the constant tug-of-war between creator Gene Roddenberry and the network. Roddenberry envisioned Star Trek as a
platform to discuss social justice, race relations, war, and peace. Issues rarely addressed in mainstream entertainment. NBC, however, pushed back, fearing controversy. Scripts dealing with topics like interracial relationships or critiques of war were often flagged or heavily edited. Shatner vividly recalls the filming of the famous interracial kiss between himself and Nichelle Nichols, the first of its kind on American television. The network was terrified, he explained. They wanted to shoot two versions, one with the kiss and one without. Nichelle and I deliberately flubbed every take of the no-kiss version, so they had no choice but to air the kiss. Behind the cameras, tension also ran high among the crew. Directors often clashed with actors over creative choices, while producers fought to keep the show on budget. Shatner describes moments where the stress nearly boiled over, with tempers flaring and arguments erupting during filming. We were fighting the studio, fighting the clock, and sometimes fighting each other, he admitted. Yet, despite the chaos, there was also resilience. Shatner acknowledges that the cast and crew shared a sense of mission, even if fractured by personal disputes. They knew Star Trek was something special, something bigger than themselves. Looking back, he recognizes the irony. A show about a starship boldly going into the unknown was itself constantly on the verge of collapse. People saw the finished product and thought it was flawless, Shatner reflected. But behind those, episodes were nights of panic, endless rewrites, and duct tape holding everything together. In truth, Star Trek only survived because of its passionate fan base, who wrote letters by the thousands to save it from cancellation. Shatner admits that without the fans, the show might have disappeared into obscurity after just 2 seasons. "The fans kept us alive," he said. "They gave us a second chance when no one else believed in us. For all its behind-the-scenes chaos, Star Trek endured." And yet, Shatner insists, the battles fought off-camera were just as intense and just as defining as the voyages depicted on screen. At 93, William Shatner often finds himself looking back not just at the show that made him famous, but at the journey that came with it. Time has given him perspective, both on the triumphs and the regrets, and in his recent revelations, he doesn't hold back. The legacy of Star Trek is undeniable. What began as a modest television series in 1966 has grown into one of the most influential franchises in entertainment history, spawning movies, spin-offs, books, and conventions that continue to thrive nearly 60 years later. Shatner knows that without the show, his life would have been very different. "Star Trek gave me everything," he admitted. "It gave me a career, a platform, and most of all, it gave me a connection to millions of people who saw something of themselves in the show." But along with pride, there are regrets. Shatner has often spoken about the strained relationships he had with some of his co-stars, particularly George Takei and Leonard Nimoy. While Nimoy and Shatner reconciled, in their later years, the tension between them during the original series left scars. "I wish I had been more understanding back then," Shatner confessed. "I was young, ambitious, and sometimes blind to how my actions affected others." The pain of Nimoy's passing in 2015 still lingers for him, a reminder that not every rift can be healed in time. Another regret Shatner carries is how underappreciated Star Trek was during its original run. The cast and crew endured low budgets, constant network interference, and the looming threat of cancellation, only to see the show canceled after 3 seasons. "We didn't know it would become what it became," Shatner explained. "At the time, it just felt like we were fighting to survive." That fight, however, was worth it, because the show's influence grew far beyond what anyone imagined. Today, Shatner marvels at the cultural impact Star Trek has had, from inspiring scientists and astronauts to pushing social boundaries on race and gender. The series proved that television could be more than entertainment. It could be a catalyst for change. "We showed a future where humanity worked together, where differences were celebrated rather than feared, Shatner said, and that vision still matters. Even now, decades after his final voyage as Captain Kirk, Shatner continues to be humbled by the devotion of fans. Conventions draw thousands, with generations of families attending together, united by the spirit of exploration and hope. Shatner acknowledges that this connection has been one of the greatest gifts of his life. To know that something we created has touched so many people, that's the real legacy, he reflected. As he approaches the twilight of his life, Shatner is candid about mortality. He has embraced his role as a cultural icon, but he insists he is still just a man who was lucky enough to be part of something extraordinary. "I'm 93 now," he said quietly. "Every day is a reminder that nothing lasts forever. But the beauty of Star Trek is that it will outlive all of us. It's not just my story, it belongs to the world." Perhaps his most poignant reflection is about what Star Trek taught him personally. The show wasn't just about space, he explained. It was about humanity, about striving to be better, kinder, and more courageous. And in many ways, it shaped me as much as it shaped the audience. For William Shatner, the journey has been long, filled with challenges, controversies, and regrets. But as he reveals the truths of what really happened behind the scenes, he does so with gratitude. "We didn't always get it right," he admitted, "but we reached for the stars. And sometimes, reaching is what matters most." At 93, Shatner's voice carries the weight of history, of a man who stood on the bridge of the Enterprise and invited the world to dream. And now, as he shares his final reflections, one truth shines brightest. Star Trek was never just a television show. It was a promise of hope, one that continues to guide generations boldly into the unknown.